The great debate we're having in America is whether or not the government or the private sector should be providing jobs. It's not an either-or thing. Both have to do it. The private sector will never be able to provide all the jobs for Americans because the private sector exists to hire as few people as possible so the profit margins can be larger, to pay as low wage as possible so the profit margin can be bigger, to be able to hire people overseas because they are cheaper than American workers. So we know the private sector will do everything it can to get by with hiring as few people as possible so it can make a bigger profit. Knowing that, the government has to step in and make sure that there are jobs for all those people that aren't employed in the private sector. And that means jobs having to do with infrastructure, jobs having to do in the health industry. Any way that we can put people to work so that they can provide for their families is what we ought to be doing, and not worry about whether the job is private or public. As long as people are working, that's good.
Now, I love that point by Jerry Springer, and let me just note that he was on Current, and he made a lot of great political points, so I feel like he gets a bad rap for the show that he does. But Lucas, let me start off with you. What do you think needs to happen in order for economic recovery in this country? Do you think that we should focus on the private sector, the public sector? Should it be an equal mix of both? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the basic problem that we're facing right now is the lack of demand. And that is why no one is hiring people. So, you don't hire. He made the excellent point that you basically, if you're an employer, you wait as long as possible to hire someone new. So you only do that when the orders for your product, whatever it is, are exceeding what your workforce can produce. And basically what we have right now is the private sector is not basically having enough people to sell to. So we need the government to step in and kickstart the economic cycle. And I think that's basically when the private sector can't fill that demand, you need the government to step in. And that's kind of basic economics that we've had for the last 60, 70 years.
Now, Desi, wouldn't you argue that we need the public sector for more than that? I mean, there are certain elements of society where the public sector makes much more sense than the private sector. Just one thing that comes up at the top of my head is our prison system. Usually, if you have a private prison system, they have an incentive to lock away as many people as possible for nonviolent offenses. Are there other examples you could think of where the public sector makes more sense than the private sector?
Well, absolutely. Let's look at the military. Mm-hmm. The military, that is a government, socialist government program that we have that employs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, not just directly, just by hiring of people directly in the military, but also from the indirect jobs that come from that as well. So I don't think you can really separate the government out of the public sector, out of the private sector. They actually have to go hand in hand. It seems like they really need to work together. And when there is no demand, like we've had with the Great Recession, mm-hmm. then somebody has to step in. The demand, the buyer of last resort becomes the government in this case. That sort of provides the funding and that bridge between the recession and bringing receipts back up again for private sector. If there's no demand, then somebody's got to step in and do it. Otherwise, we get collapse, and nobody wants that.
Malcolm, another aspect of that video that I loved was that he talked about profit motive a little bit, right? And he talked about a lot of these companies hiring employees and basically making one employee do the job of several other employees because they want to save as much money as possible. They want to protect their bottom line. At the same time, these companies are getting huge tax cuts because they are the so-called job creators. What are your thoughts on that?
What I think that Jerry doesn't say, but I would say if I were a Republican, which I'm sitting in for a Republican, is that the private sector needs to have confidence. They're always talking about confidence. We need to have more confidence to hire, and we can't be confident because there are too many regulations, or we don't know what regulations the Obama administration is going to. I mean, any day now, there could be a whole slew of new regulations, and there goes our profit motive. And it makes no sense to me because, as Lucas pointed out, I think if there is a demand for your product, you are going to hire more people to satisfy that demand. That is very basic.
That's all the confidence in the world you need.
Yeah.
Knowing that someone is going to buy your product.
That's a lot more confidence than you need than worrying about what theoretical regulations the Obama administration is going to put in place, which I don't think they really are anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Also, there's been a lot of surveys done recently that, that they survey small business owners, they survey big business owners, and they all pretty much say that they are not actually concerned about regulations. New regulations, old regulations. Regulations don't even fall on the list at all. What they're concerned about is demand. If there's nobody there to buy their stuff, if people are out of work, they're not getting paid. If they're not getting paid, they don't have money to spend. If they don't have money to spend, they're not buying anything. They're basically holding on.
I just think this whole argument about how regulation gives people an incentive to not be entrepreneurs is ridiculous, or not run their business or hire jobs. It's ridiculous. I think about it in our terms with the Young Turks, right? And would regulation stop us from doing what we're doing? Right? If we had to pay higher taxes, are we just going to close up shop and stop doing what we're doing? No, that's not the case at all. And by the way, the lack of regulation is precisely the reason why companies like Ford are spending $1 billion in countries like China to build new factories. Those factories should be built here in the United States, where we gave companies like Ford a bailout. So the way that we give people or companies and corporations incentives to outsource jobs, to not create more jobs, to basically hoard their money into their bank accounts and not give people new opportunities, even if the economy is not so great. We are giving them the ability to create new jobs with these tax cuts, but they're not doing it.
And the corporations are sitting on a hoard of cash right now. This is also very well known, that they're not using this to hire more people. The banks are not using this to make more loans to small businesses. They're sitting on this cash. I think they're sitting on it to wait out to see what happens, to see what they can squeeze out. If they just hold it just a little bit longer out, then maybe they can actually get a little bit more.
Yeah, there's not a lack of cash on hand, and I think that's where there's an element to this that is a little different than anything we've experienced in since basically the Great Depression, which is the degree of income inequality and wealth concentration. So I think that part of the problem is there just is not the purchasing power in the middle class to buy the goods that our economy is capable of producing, and that basically in the last 20 or 30 years, all of our economic expansion has been financed by debt. And that basically now we're in an overhang where the middle class is in a huge degree of debt, so there isn't any money to kind of kickstart that recovery again. And we need, I know it's taboo
debt?
to say.
More debt?
No, we need wealth distribution. We need a redistribution of wealth to diversify it into the economy, because that strengthens the overall economy. It makes it more stable because you have less speculation, and it puts purchasing power back into the most number of households that you can.
If I were actually a Republican, there'd be steam coming out of my ears, and I'd be, income redistribution, how dare you suggest such a thing? No, the market should control everything. And if Jerry Springer is saying we need more infrastructure in this country, well, if the market demands it, if the market wants us to fix bridges, if the market wants us to, fix our highways and take care of our sewage systems that are 80, 100, 150 years old, well, then the market will take care of that. And if it doesn't, well, so some people fall off, the bridges collapse. I mean, you can't make an omelet without some people falling off of bridges.
But the market can't function without an infrastructure to support it. You can't ship things anywhere across the country if there's no rail lines, there's no roads.
Well, if there's a demand for it, then companies will move in.
But that sounds great in sort of this ideological world, but in reality, it doesn't actually happen. Well, it never happens.
It doesn't. I mean, a perfect example of that would be like the potholes on Wilshire Boulevard. Like Wilshire Boulevard, that'll get you to Beverly Hills, the richest area in Los Angeles, right? How come no one's fixing that? Los Angeles is bankrupt. They don't have the money to fix it. Are the wealthy people paying to fix it? No, they're not paying.
But are the roads in Beverly Hills nice? That's the question, aren't they? Right?
I guess, I guess in certain enclaves it's fine, but it's
in the gated communities. The roads are.
But Malcolm actually makes a decent point there, because you will have wealthy people in this country now who are hiring their private security because they know that our police enforcement is being defunded. Places like Camden, New Jersey are seeing an increase in crime because they don't have money to pay their police officers, so people are getting laid off. So there's something to be said about that, because I feel like the top 1% in this country will hire their private security, and they'll do what they need to do to live in their bubble of ultra wealth.
They'll be fine.
And they'll be fine, exactly.
Absolutely. They don't have anything to worry about, but that's where I think we're also kind of approaching a pivotal point where we have taken the idea of individualism, of being in it for yourself, to kind of an extreme, and we need to decide whether we want to have a society where everyone's got buy-in Because if we don't, then basically that's what we're going to have is kind of feudalism. We're going to have gated communities where all of the wealthiest people live and everybody else is kind of screwed, which I guess is nice for them in their gated community, but it also means they're going to be terrified to leave there. They're going to have to live in these.
There won't be anybody there to buy the stuff that their employees produce from their companies.
Yeah.
If there's nobody to buy your things, if you're some rich guy who's made a lot of money off of making widgets, if nobody can buy your widgets except someplace else out of the country, you know, that's your best luck that you can get. And in the worldwide recession we have right now, you know, they're hollowing out their own future income.
Absolutely, and I think that's Nick Hanauer he was the one that did the TED Talk that was sort of censored because it was too controversial on economic.
It was banned for a day.
Yeah, on economic topics. But basically what he is saying, and I completely agree with this, is in some ways President Obama making the argument of fairness for greater taxation is missing the point. Because if you want a functioning economy in the manner that we saw since World War II, you need a broad middle class with good purchasing power. So the argument should be, if we want a healthy economy, we need a greater distribution of wealth. It's not, forget fairness. Fairness is great, but that's not even the argument. If you want the market to function, you need to have cash more equally distributed.
Exactly. As far across as possible. People need to be paid enough to be able to participate in the economy.
But that was the theory. I mean, we have Henry Ford's theory was, or so I've heard, that he said that he wanted to pay his workers enough that they could afford to buy his products. And I think that's what built the middle class in this country, is that we had the vast middle people who had enough income where they could afford to buy the products that the rich were selling them. And the rich had a vested interest in all those middle class people being able to buy their products. But now that we live in an integrated global community, the rich, the wealthy, the corporations don't have that vested interest in a middle class in America because they can sell their products to the middle class in India and the growing middle class. Well, but our system is not based on patriotism. Our system is based on talking about patriotism and then not really caring. And so we have a system set up where the people who are supposed to be doing all the hiring, all the job creators, my people, because I'm a Republican, because I'm sitting in a Republican, in theory, it's going to work the way it worked before, but they don't care about that anymore. They're happy to sell their products in China and India to the burgeoning middle class there. And without that vested interest, we need to step in, the public sector needs to step in, as Jerry pointed out,
right.
But persuading those people to invest in that when they don't have a vested interest financially, that's a tough sell, especially when Obama is, a socialist.
Now, I'll let Malcolm take that last point for this topic. And I will say, Malcolm, you are playing an excellent Republican on the show.
I'm going back
making
and forth.
the common douchey arguments that a Republican would make.